in today's session, I will pass over to Saami Hadipour, our Senior Sales Executive, and he'll be covering Sesame Analytics, so looking at insights and performance tracking to help you make smarter investment decisions. So with that, I will hand it over to Saami to take you through the session.
Thank you very much, Amy. So as Amy discussed, I'm going to be going through the analytics module on Sesame and how it can empower you to make smarter investment decisions for yourself, your clients, colleagues, and whatnot. So without further ado, I'm going to share my screen, and please feel free to ask any questions as well, which I'll try and get to at the end. Okay, so if you can all see my screen now, when I log on to Sesame, obviously the first thing I see is the Sesame dashboard, which we've discussed in other previous modules. But really up top, you'll see a number of different tabs. And if I want to navigate into deep dive analytics, well, I select the tab, and I will see a little ribbon on the left-hand side of the page where it can be expanded or collapsed. So I'm going to expand that, and I can see right now I'm in the performance module for Sesame. Now, firstly, performance is split into two tabs. There's overview and a more detailed, granular deep dive into contribution. Now, for starters, when I'm on the overview page, I will have some general statistics related to the performance of my portfolio, your Sharps, your Sortinos, some max drawdowns, different returns over a period of time. I would also be able to see cumulative performance over a period of time, and I can change the metrics and rebalance that again at 100. But if I look at all, I can actually zoom into that specific graph. And let's say I want to remove the benchmark that I've discussed, that I've decided, and I want to hover in over a period. The graphs are all very dynamic and interactive. So I can zoom in over a specific period of time, and I can very easily move that around and analyze my performance over that specific time frame. Now, equal to this, all the objects on Sesame can be extracted into Excel or PDF, so I can have that information extracted immediately if I so wish to. The same goes for the graphs and the data behind it, even to an image as well. Let's take a deeper dive into performance contribution and really see where we're making the money from. And what's important about that is that we can see on our contribution, we'll be able to see some top and bottom contributors. So tomorrow, if we want to make a pivot on one of our investment strategies, we can actually understand where we've gained and where we've lost. Importantly, I can see not only my top and bottoms, but where the contribution is being driven from. So here I have a function called group by, which allows me to group by different types of categories that allow me to really understand the drivers of growth and detractors of growth in my portfolio. So perhaps I want to group by asset type, and I want to see, okay, have I made more money in common stock, and what's specifically driving that growth against which portfolio versus my private equity funds, for example. And equally, my corporate bonds, as is the case with our platform native to multi-asset classes. I can also go into the settings. I can adjust, I can amend and move the columns around. Perhaps I wanted to look at the previous month-end profit and loss. I want to look at the quarter-to-date profit and loss, or the month-to-date profit and loss as a percentage. So I can really easily customize the columns and the data that I'm visualizing on Sesame as well. Now, when it comes to group by, again, we've got many different functionalities within group by. Perhaps I want to look at my performance by sector, right, where I can see, the contribution in the year to date for my profit and loss has been pretty high, for example, on the materials front, as opposed to my consumer discretionary or my consumer staples asset classes. Now, if we deep dive into exposure and I look at exposure, on exposure, I can get a clear view of asset allocation every day that's coming into the portfolio, top positions, some net exposures, but also my holdings. So if I want to look at my holdings and say I want to group them by sector, I can see how exposed I am to those different sectors and where the assets are being held within those portfolios. So here I can see I've got 38.3% exposure towards consumer discretionary based assets versus 5.8% towards my IT assets. And again, once we expand the boxes, we can deep dive specifically into those assets and asset types that are driving that growth. The same concept with group by follows through from performance contribution also to the exposure side. So perhaps if I want to look by region and see how exposed I am to different regions and different sectors. Now, equally under exposure, we can view our cash holdings. So we can see how much cash we have. We've decided in this case to group it by currency, for example, so I can see the different currencies that I'm holding at which portfolios. I can group it the other way around. I can look at the specific custodians that are holding the money and so on and so forth. Now, for asset owners, private equity is also very important. And for the first time, we're actually going to be able to see cumulative commitments, cumulative capital calls, what's within the portfolio, what's remaining. So in this case, I can see that I have 15 million of capital committed to the private equity funds, cumulative commitments, excuse me. I can see how much capital has been called. I can see the distributions that I've received, and importantly, what's remaining, which is going to be really interesting later in another module when we discuss, cash flow projections and reporting and trying to analyze where to allocate their cash and having target asset allocation according to different asset classes. So in this case, again, we've grouped by asset types. Within private equity, we can see we've got a secondaries portfolio, we've got a fund of funds, we've got some co-investments. And again, we'll be able to see the line by line breakdown of the commitments, what's remaining, the capital that's been called, the distributions, the marketing cost values, the distributed paid in against the residuals, against the total value paid in as well. And again, if I go into settings, I can see that, we've grouped that by asset strategy, but also asset realized IRRs if we have the relevant data at the company level, including IRRs at the fund level. But let's say I want to take a deeper dive into a single asset, a private asset, right? Well, here what I can do is if I select an asset, for example, this fund, Hudson Bay's Vintage, I can see, okay, the capital's been called. I haven't received any distributions at this time, right? And I can really take a deeper dive into those private assets. Same goes with historical flows. And historical flows is very important because if I select another portfolio here, I want to be able to understand what's coming in and out of the bank account every day across the different entities that I hold. So the point is here I've selected my FO holding company. I can see within this date range, so I can select a specific date and time that I want to view the data. Within this date range, I can see a number of distributions within which specific fund or co-investment that I've had those distributions. I can see the fees that I've paid, the capital calls, the purchases, for example, fixed income. I can also look at the financing, the deposits, the taxes, the commitments, the dividends, and a lot of these individual asset types can be then added on to Sesame according to the preferences that you have, especially through with a custom tagging module that we also have. But we can group by type and subtype as well, and really easily deep dive into that data. Now, also, if I want to, for example, look at a specific asset class, let's say I go into distributions and I want to look at CFC partners on the second vintage, I can select that and this will take me to a single asset view page, which is part of the analytics module. And I can again deep dive specifically into that asset that I'm holding and see the allocation and the quantity, see when the flows for the distribution were, the analytics that come up on that page, the unrealized profit and loss, the price itself of how that's adapted over time. So not only do I have a single asset view where I can deep dive into a single asset, but equally I have a very powerful flows module, which really allows me to look at a granular level for any movements of capital, either in or out of any individual legal entity that we're holding within our overall portfolio. So I should also touch potentially on the hedge fund side, where we are also able to take information from the data feeds that we connect to on hedge funds. So specific hedge funds that we get the data from your portfolios. So here I've grouped by a liquidity notice on the fund, and I can see different information related to the hedge funds within our portfolio that we're holding. And of course, once again, you'll see granular flexibility with regards to how we can present the data to you and how, for example, if you want, let's say the liquidity notice further up, you can very easily move these columns around and the visuals that adapt to it. And again, as I showed before on the images, all the objects here can be exported to Excel or PDF. To take it one step further as well, If we look at holdings or we look at any specific page and we want a member of our team, you'll see there's a note. You can download the whole page as PDF or Excel. We can also create notes on the page. We can also create tasks for other members on the page to further deep dive into specific analytics that we're showing. So here, if I want to ask a member of my team to take a look at our allocation to Redline and Suites, I can select that, and that will create a little pop-up that will allow me to create a task title and assign it to an individual, for example, for a review purpose. So this really, in terms of when it comes down to empowering you with investment decisions, this really does empower the user to be able to make better investment decisions by understanding not only where they've made the money from, understanding where their exposures are, understanding where the money is coming in and out of the accounts, understanding how much free cash they have, and for what types of investments that could potentially be very viable for them according to the current assets that they have within their portfolio. So that's what I wanted to show on the analytics module, and I'm just going to take a moment to see if there's anyone who would like to ask any questions.
Great, thanks, Saami. We did have a couple of questions come in through the chat. First question, can you create custom groupings to analyze assets in the way that I want to?
Okay, great question. So absolutely. I mean, one thing I showed on performance contribution was this group by button, where we can select and say, I want to view by asset type. And if we open common stock, I can see all the assets. But what if we want to look at that in a different way? What if we want to say, okay, let's look by region, then by country, then by asset type? Absolutely. So what I'll do is I'll go into settings. I select settings. I scroll down. And let's say risk region. I want risk region to be at the very top. I select that. I can drag that to the top. That's the top level that I want to analyze. Then I want to go by country. Then I want to go by the asset type. All I need to do is click save, and immediately Sesame automates that to regroup the assets by our pre-selected group by that we've just decided on. So here, if I expand Europe, I can see I've decided that we've got Eastern and Western Europe as two different regions. I expand Europe. I can see different countries that I'm holding assets in, and I can see the performance, for example, in my UK-based assets. So the allocation has been 7.2%, and as a percentage of my profit and loss, that's been 2.91%. If I expand the UK, I can then see the different types of assets. Again, that asset type that we're holding. So taking it one step further to, okay, now we can see the common stock that we're holding within the UK and the drivers of that growth, or the time deposits, or the corporate bonds, or the property. The same goes for exposure. So when I go into holdings, I can group by in any which way, shape, or form that I like. So if I go into settings, and perhaps I want to go, again, we can do the same thing. Let's go by risk region. I want to see how exposed am I to a specific region. Then I select country, I drag that up. Then I want to know the asset types that I'm exposed to within that specific country of that specific region. I click save. And now I can see my exposures. So I can see in North America, I'm quite exposed here. I can see the different countries in North America that I'm exposed to. So let's say it's the US, and I can see the different stocks that I'm holding, for example, in the US, right? Maybe in LATAM, the same, Brazil, Mexico, I've got an equity ETF, for example. So I hope that answers your first question, Amy.
Thanks, Saami. That's great. We'd have two more. One just came in. How can I view my performance contribution segmented by legal entity?
Yeah, that's a great question. I should mention that on every single page within analytics, if you hover over this magnifying glass and you select that, you'll notice that I can actually select any specific entity on any individual page. So let's go back to performance contribution. And here I'm looking at my FO holding company, but I can also see that underneath my holding company, I've got FO Finco with a number of sub-portfolios in it. And I've also got my FO Opco with a number of sub-portfolios. I've also got asset owner. I've got a trust here. So perhaps I want to look at just the information related to the Finco underneath my holding company. So I select the data and I have the relevant data. Perhaps I want to look at another legal entity. I want to look at the trust that I'm holding. I select that and I can see the information related to the trust. So the answer is that any page on Sesame, we can decide which entity we are viewing the relevant analytics and metrics from by selecting the magnifying glass. If it's in a consolidated top level, so for example, asset owner, or I should say the FO holding company, I can see that that's a consolidated level of the financial and the operating company, but I can even select an entity which is slightly lower down within my ownership structure, or I can select a completely new top holdco as well that may be within my structure as well. So we can look at the information, the contribution, the analytics, the flows, either at the consolidated at the top level or at any sub-legal entity level related to that top level company.
Thanks, Saami. And then last question, where can I view the performance of a specific private asset?
That's a great question. I did actually cover that before, but we have a private asset single view here, which allows you to very simply navigate between the specific assets that are being held. So if I want to look, I can see that private single view. I have some of the assets that I have here. I can see different flows, different P multiples that are related to that specific asset, and to understand if that J curve really does make sense. So I can deep dive into that single asset on the private single asset view.
Thank you so much, Saami, for going through those and for the overview of Sesame Analytics. Thank you so much again for your time.
Thank you, everyone.